back to my channel. My name is Maddie and today I'm going to react to timeline of space exploration made by Useful Charts. As you have already figured out if you have watched my previous space video that I really love the space type of information, and I'm a sci-fi nerd. You could say that. I love any sci-fi type of shows, movies, anything. So yeah, that's why I am watching this. In my previous video where I reacted to Artemis 2 explainer, mainly there were pictures, but yeah, more explaining that I actually knew about, more info that I personally knew about. But there were some comments there. It's just really sad that there are some people out there that thinks that this is fake, and I know there are some people who thinks that NASA landed on moon and they don't believe that, and also they are not believing that the mission that happened. So yeah, it is very interesting and really sad that they think that we aren't able to do that. We are doing so many things right now with AI and technology, so I don't know why do they think that we have not managed to be outside and be able to do all of that. And especially we have satellite, GPU, where GPS, where do they think where all of this come from? As I said, I have no idea what their mind is, and it's really sad to think that those things are not real. But yeah, let's react to the detailed journey of the space exploration, I guess. So yeah, let's start.
This is Matt Baker. For the first time in over 50 years, humans
It's
are
been
going
50
to the moon.
years.
The mission is called Artemis 2, and it's a
Yeah.
really big deal because although sending humans into space has become somewhat of a routine thing, sending them beyond Earth orbit has not. Let me explain. This
Yeah,
is Earth.
there has been
And this is what's called
you know
lower Earth orbit.
ISS,
It's basically
International
everything
Space
from
Station,
about
but being outside
160
of the orbit, I
kilometers
guess
above the Earth's surface to
it has been pretty long, I
2,000
guess.
kilometers above the Earth's surface. To
Okay.
date, of the 384 human space flights that have been launched into space, only 9, that's right, 9, have gone beyond lower Earth orbit. These unique space flights traveled all the way to the moon, which, as you can see, makes for a much farther
Okay, only
trip.
9.
The last time anyone traveled this far
I
was
mean, it does
way back
takes
in 1972.
lots of money, I guess.
That is, until the current Artemis mission, which is on its
Wow.
way right now. It includes
1972.
the first ever woman to make the trip, the first ever person of color, and the first non-American.
Wow.
So, in order to mark this special occasion, I decided
That's
to
a good
launch
thing.
something of my own. This brand new timeline of space exploration chart, which not only covers the history of human spaceflight, but also the many space probes that have been sent out to explore the solar system.
Love it. Love
If
it.
you want to get a copy of this brand new chart, just head over to UsefulCharts.com right now, or simply
The
click
chart
the link in the
looks
description
complex
or
but
pinned
amazing
comment.
already.
In today's video, I'll be concentrating mostly on the section showing missions to the moon, but in future videos, I'll be covering the other parts as well. So keep an eye out for those.
Yeah, they have these amazing charts, this channel.
The date October the 4th, 1957 is generally seen as being the start of the space age.
1957, okay.
That's because that's the day that the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1, which became the
Sputnik
first
1.
ever human-made object to orbit the Earth. Up to that
Wow.
point, there had been rockets that had reached space, the definition being 100 kilometers above the Earth, but their payloads had all fallen back down after just a few minutes, something that's called
It was a space war
suborbital
that was
spaceflight.
going on because of the
Sputnik
Cold
1 was
War,
different because
mainly.
it reached the speed necessary to stay in space. In other words, to go round and round the Earth without falling, something called orbital spaceflight. But then, just 1 year later, the Soviet Union did something even more remarkable. They launched Luna 1, which was the first probe to escape Earth's gravity
Wow.
altogether.
The fact they
and
managed to do all
travel
of that.
all the way to the moon. It was actually
just
supposed
after
to hit the moon
1 year
meaning
later.
crash into it, but it missed, and therefore ended up being a flyby mission. Luna 2, launched in October 1958, was the first probe to actually hit the moon, and thus is the oldest human-made object on the surface. Now, neither Luna
Acha,
1 nor
okay.
Luna 2 had a camera on board. but Luna 3 did, which allowed humanity to see something it had never seen before.
Okay,
You
so
see,
it was
one
the
of the interesting
Luna 3
things
one.
about the moon is that it is tidally locked to the Earth, which means that when we look up at it, we always see the same side.
Yeah.
But when Luna 3 flew by the moon, it took photos, and therefore we got our first ever look at the far side of the
Wow.
moon. So
So
as
it
you
was
can
the
see, it was
first.
the
This is
Soviets who
done by
were
Luna
clearly
3,
in the lead at the
1959.
beginning of the space race. The US didn't have its first fully successful mission to the moon until Ranger 7 in 1964. It
Okay.
purposefully crash landed on the moon and sent back the first ever high resolution
Okay, so it
photos
was
of the
purposeful. But
surface
why?
before
What
it
is the
did so.
reason for that
Now, one thing you need to know
purposeness?
about this chart is that it doesn't show every single successful mission. So, for example, after Ranger 7 came Ranger 8 and 9, which also impacted the moon.
But
Okay,
what
so
is
the
the
next
reason? Like
step was
to
to
see the surface of
land
the
on the
moon?
moon,
Like how
not by
it
crashing, but
is?
by making what's called a soft landing. Yet again, it was the Soviets who were the first to do this, with Luna
Okay.
9 in February of 1966. But this time, the US was
1966.
close behind, soft landing Surveyor 1 just a few months later. Likewise, the
Arms
Soviets were also
space
first to
race.
get one of their probes to orbit the moon, Luna 10, in March of 66. But the US was once again close behind, achieving the same thing with Lunar Orbiter 1 in August.
Okay.
Now, of course, the
So
real
yeah.
goal was not to just keep sending robotic spacecrafts to the moon, but to eventually send one with humans. But in order to achieve this, humans first had to conquer lower Earth orbit. So let's back up a bit and quickly take a look at that. When it comes to human spaceflight, the Soviets had a program called Vostok, and
Yeah, I
the
heard
US
about
had
that
one called
Vostok.
Project Mercury. Both countries
Project
used
Mercury,
animals
okay?
for test flights, but take note that whereas the Soviets did test flights with dogs, the US used monkeys and apes.
Okay, so they had a fight
Again,
that
the
we are going to
Soviets
do
were
different
initially ahead,
animals.
so the first higher
And the
organisms
animals
to
feels
survive orbital
great.
spaceflight ended up being two dogs named Belka and Strelka in 1960 aboard Korabl Sputnik 2, a prototype for Vostok.
Do
Laika
this
had
dog
been sent
survive
into
or
orbit earlier
no?
on Sputnik 2, but sadly did not survive. And even
Yeah.
earlier, way back in
I know
1951,
that
Dezik and Sekin had been sent into space and had survived,
Laika
but
didn't
their
survive.
flight had been suborbital, not orbital. However, with Belka and Strelka's successful orbital flight, the path was made clear for a
Okay,
human to
so
fly
those two
aboard
dogs were successful,
Vostok.
so they were
As
being
you
able to be
probably know,
alive.
the first human to fly to space was a Soviet man named Yuri Gagarin aboard Vostok 1 in
We
1961.
never actually
There were
know. Like I
6
don't think anyone
Vostok
could.
flights
If anyone
altogether,
asks, like who was the
and the
first
last
person
one,
in
Vostok 6
orbit,
in
no one could say like it
1963,
was
carried the
Yuri
first woman
Gagarin.
to fly to space, Valentina
Valentina.
Tereshkova.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the US was busy with Project Mercury. It
No
sent
one really
Ham the
remembered them.
chimpanzee into space just a few months before Yuri Gagarin, and then the first American, Alan Shepard, about 1 month after
No one
Gagarin.
remembered
But take
Alan
note that
Shepard too.
these two flights were both suborbital. The first American to make an orbital spaceflight was John Glenn in 1962.
Okay, 1962.
Next
Like this
came
is
the
going on
Voskhod
like hard.
program in the Soviet Union and Project Gemini in the US, both of which featured two-person spacecrafts. Both programs involved the first ever spacewalks by each country, and in addition to this, Gemini in particular focused on astronauts learning to do certain maneuvers in space, such as changing orbit and docking, things that would be important for future lunar missions. Okay, so up to this point, the
Docking,
Soviets
yeah,
had been
it's
the
pretty
clear frontrunners in the
important.
space
What I have
race.
learned from
However,
Interstellar.
starting in the year 1966, things started to turn in favor of the US after the Soviets suffered several major tragedies in a row. The first was the unexpected death of Sergei Korolev.
Okay,
You
so
are probably familiar with the name Werner von Braun, the former Nazi who was then recruited by the US,
wow,
becoming their
the Nazi
chief
being
rocket
recruited.
engineer.
Yay!
Well, Korolev was basically the Soviets' Werner von Braun, so losing him right in the middle of the space race was a major blow.
Okay, so that is the
Then
reason
in
why they fall off.
1967, the next Soviet spacecraft, the Soyuz, which could hold up to 3 crew members, crash landed during its very first mission, killing the pilot. This was followed by Yuri Gagarin's death in 1968 in a plane crash. and then the failure of their moon rocket, the N-1, in 1969.
Seriously,
The
one
US
man
also
died
suffered a
and you
major
just
tragedy in
everything
1966
just
when
like
astronauts
fall off.
died in a
Like
cockpit fire while
wow,
testing the
like
new
do they
Apollo
not have any
spacecraft.
engineers
But then
except
things
him?
got better and better.
What?
Take note that the Apollo program box has 3 columns. This first one represents flights that stayed within lower Earth orbit, whereas the second represents flights to the moon that did not land, and the third represents flights to the moon that did land. Now,
Okay.
although everyone tends to focus on Apollo 11,
Yeah.
as it was the mission that landed humans on the
Apollo
moon for the
11.
very first time, Apollo 8 was in many ways even more important. Similar in
Okay.
scope to the Artemis 2 mission occurring right now, Apollo 8 saw the first humans to be launched aboard a Saturn V rocket, which
Okay,
was
so
the
this is like
US's
Artemis 2,
equivalent
like where
of
they
the
just
Soviet N-1.
like a
But
situation
whereas
like
the N-1 failed, the Saturn V succeeded
where they're
and
like
sent humans past lower Earth orbit for the very first time
setting up
and
the scene, I
onwards
guess.
towards the vicinity of the moon. It is estimated that a quarter of the world's population was watching when Apollo 8 arrived at the moon on Christmas Eve 1968, at which time the astronauts read some
Quarter
verses
of the
from
world was
Genesis
watching.
chapter 1, ending with, "We close
People
with
don't
good
have any
night, good
internet.
luck, a Merry
I guess TV, but
Christmas,
still,
and
people
God
didn't
bless
have
all
like
of you on the good earth."
people didn't have
They
TVs.
also took
Maybe
this famous
maybe
photo
except
called
for
Earthrise, which was the first ever color
Europe
picture
and
of
America, I
the
guess.
Earth taken from the moon, and which has been credited with launching the modern environmentalist movement. After Apollo 8, there were 2 more
Wow.
test
So
flights, and
that
then
was from
6
there, like
actual
Apollo
moon
8.
landings, starting with Apollo 11 in 1969 and ending with Apollo 17 in 1972. Each time, 2 astronauts landed
So
on the moon,
was
while
Apollo
a
17 the
third
last one?
astronaut stayed aboard the main spacecraft and orbited the moon. That means to date, only 12 people have had the privilege of actually walking on the moon. The final 3
Wow,
missions
12
are
people.
notable in that they were longer, spending about
None of
3
them were
days
women
on
though.
the surface
That's
each
sad.
time. They also made use of the lunar roving vehicle. Now, if you look closely, you'll notice that Apollo 13 is missing from the list of landing missions. That's because it was supposed to land on the moon, but didn't, due to an exploded oxygen tank. The story of that mission and how the astronauts managed to make it home safely is told in the Tom Hanks movie Apollo 13.
Okay,
Now,
yeah, that
while
was
the
the
Soviets
movie,
did
Apollo
not ever
13.
send any humans to the moon, they did actually complete several more important lunar missions. For example, a few months before Apollo 8, they succeeded in sending the first ever life forms to the moon.
Okay, so
Aboard
in small
Zond
scale level,
5,
Russia were
which
also
included
doing some
2
things, but
tortoises who
clearly
arrived back to Earth
US
home
has
safely. During the 70s,
surpassed
the
them.
Soviets also completed several sample return missions, as well as 2 missions involving robotic rovers, Lunokhod 1 and Lunokhod 2. But then, following Luna 24 in 1976, exploration of the moon abruptly stopped. And for the next 14 years, there was not
1976.
a single lunar mission launched by any country. So, no missions to the moon during the 1980s. There were 2 main reasons
Wow,
for this.
so there was
First,
nothing in
with the completion
1980s.
of the Apollo moon landings, the US had basically won the space race hands down. So
Yeah,
there was no longer any pressure
because they were doing
to
all
keep
of this
things up
because of the
at such
space
a
race.
fast pace. Second, priorities switched to perfecting travel within lower Earth orbit. So to this end, the Soviets focused on space stations and the US on the space shuttle. We'll be looking at these topics in a future video. But for now, since our focus is on the moon, we are going to
Yeah.
jump ahead
So
to the
the
90s
space
and
race
early
was mainly the
2000s,
reason that
which is
why
when
we have so
robotic
much
missions to the moon resumed,
advanced
albeit
technologies.
quite
Even then,
sporadically at first, starting with the Hiten orbiter sent by Japan, making Japan the 3rd country to successfully send a spacecraft to the moon. Next
okay,
came
so
2
the
more
third one.
orbiters, Clementine and Lunar Prospector, both sent by the US. These 2 are notable in that they were the first to detect the presence of ice on the moon near its poles. And then finally, for this
So
period,
cool.
we get the Smart 1 orbiter sent by the European Space Agency in 2003. But it was in the year 2007 that lunar exploration really started to ramp up with the
Okay,
arrival of
yeah,
China's
lots of
first
things.
orbiter, Chang'e 1, and Japan's second, Selene. In fact, ever since 2007, the moon has been continuously monitored by at least 1 orbiting spacecraft. usually more than one. Take note that the number shown in the purple line represents the number of spacecrafts orbiting the moon during any given year. So in
Oh, okay.
2007, it was 2, but in 2008, it went up to 3 because that's
3.
when India launched its first lunar orbiter,
Oh,
Chandrayaan
okay. It
1.
was on
Now,
2008,
Chang'e
Chandrayaan
1,
1.
Selene, and Chandrayaan 1 were not meant to be long term orbiters. So during 2009, all three were purposefully programmed to crash into the moon. But
So
before
I'm
the
just
last
thinking,
one
there
did
is so
so,
many
a new
crashes
orbiter
in the
arrived,
moon then,
the
like so many
US's
technologies
Lunar
there.
Reconnaissance Orbiter. This one is actually still
So
orbiting the
human
moon to
even
this very day
polluting
and
the
has provided us with the
place
highest resolution maps of the moon to
outside
date.
of Earth too.
Now, I won't go through every orbiter added since then,
Yeah.
but I do want to point out two recent ones because they were both sent by countries who are relatively new to space exploration. There's South Korea's Danuri orbiter, which arrived in 2022, and Pakistan's iCube-Q orbiter, which arrived in 2024. China is planning to send another orbiter this summer, so once that happens, there will be a total of 11 spacecrafts orbiting
11
the moon
escape.
at the same time, the
11.
most ever. You can see the
Yeah,
full
that will be the
list here.
most.
Now, I didn't mention it earlier, but a lot of these names were chosen due to their connection to the moon. For example, Chang'e is the Chinese goddess of the moon, and Chandra
Okay.
is the Hindu god of the moon. Yan means
Yeah.
vehicle, so
Chandra is a
Chandrayaan basically
moon.
means moon vehicle. Let's
Moon
now move
vehicle, yeah.
over to this line here, which lists all of the recent surface activity on the moon, most notably any lunar rovers. Up until 2013, only two countries, the Soviet Union and the United States, had ever soft landed a spacecraft on the moon. Well, with the landing of Chang'e 3, China became the third country to do so. That mission included a rover named U2, which means
Okay.
Jade Rabbit. It
2013.
operated until 2017. However, in 2019, Chang'e 4 arrived with U2-2, which is still operating on the moon to this day. This particular mission is also notable in that it was the first mission to land on the far side of the moon. Next up,
Okay, so it was
India
the first one
became
far
the
side.
fourth country to soft land on the moon when Chandrayaan 3 successfully
Okay,
did
so I
so in
thought Japan
2023.
would be
It brought
earlier
with it
than
the
China
Pragyan
and India,
rover.
but
Then, the following year, Japan became the
yeah,
fifth
like they
and
were the third
most
one
recent country to soft land
basically
on
in
the moon
spacecraft,
with
but
the arrival
landing
of
they are the
SLIM,
fifth.
which stands for Smart Lander for Investigating Moon. It brought with it two short-term mini rovers, Lev 1, which moved by hopping, and the baseball-sized Lev 2, which crawled. Now, the Chang'e 7 mission that I mentioned earlier is going to include not only an orbiter, but also a lander with some kind of rover and perhaps a flying vehicle, the exact details of which have not
Okay,
yet
so
been
these
released.
are future
Okay, we're now
or
ready to talk about
happening
the
right now.
Artemis program, which is the first program in over 50 years to send humans to the moon. It's named after the Greek goddess of the moon, who was the twin sister of Apollo. And its history goes back to the
Oh, okay, so
Constellation
Apollo
program,
Artemis.
which was approved by George
Okay,
W.
that's a
Bush in
clever
2004, but then
and interesting
canceled
way
by
to
Obama in
mix mythology
2011.
and
One thing that came out of that program, though, was a design for a new deep space
space.
crew vehicle called Orion. Thus, when the Artemis program was approved by the first Trump administration in 2017, it incorporated the Orion into its plan, as well as a new rocket based on the Space Shuttle program called the Space Launch System, or SLS. A third component, the service module, which provides Orion with power and propulsion, has been designed by the European Space Agency.
Oh,
All
okay.
three of these
That's
new
from
pieces
EU.
of hardware were tested for the very first time in November of 2022 during the
Oh,
uncrewed Artemis 1 mission.
okay. So these were all,
Everything
I
went
guess,
well,
tests
which
kind
is
of.
why in 2026 we've now moved on to the first crewed flight, Artemis 2. Now, in between Artemis 1 and 2, there were two other related missions of note, both by private companies. The first by Intuitive Machines, and the second by Firefly Aerospace.
Yeah, there was
You
a
see, this
private
time when
mission,
humans
like
land
Katy
on the moon,
Perry.
the
Was
plan
that
is for
the one they were
private
talking? He's
companies
talking
to
about
land the
because,
necessary supplies and equipment ahead of time. These two missions
or maybe
tested out
others.
this idea, And as such, they mark the first time that commercial companies have soft landed on the moon.
Yeah,
So,
maybe
as you
it's
can
other
see, in just a little more than a decade, we've
spacecrafts
gone from only
they
two
are talking
countries
about.
to have landed on the moon to 5 countries, plus 2 companies, soon to be followed by several more. The other thing that private companies will be helping out with when it comes to future Artemis missions is providing the 21st century version of this, the all-important lunar lander. 2 designs are currently in the works, one by
Okay, so the
Elon
NASA is
Musk's
going to take other
SpaceX and
companies'
one
help.
by Jeff
SpaceX, yeah,
Bezos's Blue
of
Origin.
course.
Now, originally, the plan was for humans to land on the moon next year during the Artemis 3 mission. But now, Artemis 3 is going to be just a crewed test flight using the new lunar lander, and it will take place within lower Earth orbit, which
Yeah, there is
means
no
that
way they are
Artemis
going to
4,
do
currently scheduled for
like personal landing
2028,
next year.
will be the landing mission. During that mission, the plan is to have 2 astronauts land on the moon, one of which will be the first ever woman to do so, and 2
Yeah,
astronauts to stay
I don't know who's
in
that
lunar
going to be,
orbit.
but
Now,
it's a
it
long
is
time
possible
coming.
that mission could be delayed, but there is now some pressure to make sure it happens fairly soon, because the Chinese have stated that they hope to land humans on the moon around 2030. So, yet again, we have a bit of a space race. As to what things will look like
Yes.
further out, it's hard to
Okay.
say. Initially, the plan was to build a space station around the moon called Gateway, but rumor has it that that's likely to get cancelled, and instead the focus will be on building a permanent moon base only. Okay, so that
Sure,
was a
we'll
look
see.
at several of the most important missions to the moon, including Artemis 2, which is happening right now. Once again, if you want to get a copy of this brand new
Yeah, so it is a very interesting topic. So we got a more detailed, like a full exploration, like how, when it started, what actually happened, the spacecraft's names. Yeah, and I'm just thinking, like whoever is going to be the first woman, like this thought, like you are going to be remembered, like just like we remember Neil Armstrong because he's the first person to ever land on Earth, to ever land on Moon. So like he's the first person to ever walk on Moon. So we all remember him. So that's how we all remember the first woman. So it is just interesting. Like whoever gets to be the woman, like yeah, you are basically going to be on the history books. But yeah, it is very interesting. Like it all started in like 1969. Like mainly 1969 is when the landing happened, but it started like in 1955. Like the video was saying, and mainly because of the space race, like the technology advanced so fast. Like even there is this series like For the Mankind, I think that's the name, and basically it is that, but it is shown there like the space race continued, like in our current timeline the space race stopped because he gave the reasons why, because that Russian dude died, and apparently they don't have any engineers because they keep crashing, I guess. But in the series, like the space race keep continuing, and so that's why the technologies advanced pretty fast, and so that's the timeline there, and it is very interesting show. Like it's a very good show, very interesting show, and it just shows how small thing can change an entire world. But I'm just thinking, like they keep saying the soft landing. So why did they soft land? Because it is actually takes much more money to come back, and because it would take much more fuel, so it's basically the way it is made so that it would just crash land, like a soft land on moon, and that's how we do it. So yeah, I just read up like why is the reason, and what I just told is basically the reason. Like because bringing back the spacecraft is much more, it is much more expensive to just soft crash land there, and it would be just cost effective, so that's why. And also the interesting thing, like after like Russia and US were fighting and there was a lull, like in 1980s there was no spacecraft. That's why it has taken so much time to to even start going out there and getting spacecraft in around moon. So after them it is actually Japan who actually sent a spacecraft out there, but to land it on moon it is actually after those two, like after Russia and US, is actually China, and then India, and then it is Japan. So I guess it took them some time to get to it, but yeah, it is just interesting. Like it just stopped for like a whole decade, and then it started back up again, and it is basically back again from like in like a later stages of the 2000s. And we have just heard like in 2007 Chandrayaan-1 from India got outside the space. So yeah, it is just a interesting topic, and yeah, I just love it. And yeah, it is such a good chart, like you could just see what is being told there, and it is just so interesting, this topic. And that was my reaction to this video. If you liked my reaction, likes and subscribe to my video. I will see you next time.